All right. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Zena. I work at Partisan Records. This is Amit.
Hi, I'm Amit.
Yeah. Amit has his own company, Faceless, which
That's right, and which kind of works with other labels. One of them that I'm working with right now is Doomtree on Dessa's project. And I guess before that, me and Zena had worked together when I was at Mass Appeal, and then after that with Run the Jewels.
And also kind of on Daptone.
And Daptone, maybe, sure.
Yeah. So we've done a number of things in the international marketing department.
Yes.
The kind of ether, the international marketing department in the ether.
Right.
And so, yeah, we were chatting to A2IM, and we thought we would be happy to share some of our experiences. And we wanted to keep it quite conversational. So I think that Eva's going to share some talking points there. Yeah, she has. And Lisa, was there any luck in sending the image that we have on the board behind us? Is that possible in the chat, or is there no way to do that?
She's actually checking now to see if she can put the image up.
Okay.
But it's turning out that the answer is no.
No problem.
Shall we send it through email to everybody, or perhaps send it afterwards?
Do you know what? I'm just going to tell you what it says on the board.
Yeah.
Okay.
The board says international marketing, why, what, how. And then we have a kind of makeshift map of the world with like some triangles. And there's a line across here that says the internet. And so we might just refer to it for like a second, but really it's just a visual tool. It's not a big deal if people can't really see it. So Amit, why should members of A2IM care about international marketing?
Right. Well, okay. So actually, this is kind of an interesting topic because even when I ran a record label, and it obviously is very genre specific, and you think twice about whether you should dedicate your resources to focusing only on one market, be it America, because that's where the band's from, or should you actually try to go internationally? The big thing now is, of course, the great leveler, which is the internet, which means that you can actually put your record up and it can pretty much be available everywhere around the world. The rationale actually why I think international marketing works is that because of the internet, to a large extent, there are a lot of markets out there that are maybe not countries, but even you could have a situation where one of your bands connects in a different market altogether that you probably didn't have because access used to be a pretty hard thing to it would be hard to access. But now you could have a band that could actually be incredibly successful in Europe much before it could be successful in the US. And I think when it is kind of myopic to only say that, okay, my band is an American band and they're going to play shows in the US. I'm not saying that you shouldn't tour internationally, but I'm just saying like there is a good shot that your band could resonate in London.
Yeah. Well, I think that's it. I think that, like, just to summarize that, there's like two reasons. One is revenue, which ultimately it's business. Every A2IM member is running a business. And that it doesn't actually cost anything to release music digitally. And there are certain things which will come into which you can do cost effectively to drive that revenue.
Sure.
But also I think a key point that you're making is that you can actually leverage the success abroad to have success at home,
Sure.
which is something that we're finding right now working with Cigarettes After Sex. That's a band that is from the US, broke in Europe, selling tickets and actually physical units in certain Asian markets, Eastern Europe, Australia, South America, Central America, all before we were actually having success in the US. And now we're finally charting on alternative radio and actually starting to move substantial sales units here as well.
Right. So yeah, that's just it. And I think the big thing out here is also in terms of just a solution. Do you want to get into the whole distribution concept?
No. Let's keep it. So that was why international marketing.
Right.
What does international marketing mean? I'll take this one and I'll try to summarize it really, really quickly.
Okay.
I think for me, and when I'm talking to my team and all of the things that we've worked on together, International marketing means thinking about the world at the very beginning, even if you're not actually going there until much later. Like actually thinking that the world could be accessible for a release, not counting it out, not just thinking about the US and then trying to add on other countries later. And that, I think we wanted to then refer to the board because there's certain traditional markets, North America, Europe, and by the way, Europe is broken down into multiple smaller markets that can each be worked independently as well and all have different languages and different cultural differences. And then Australia, Japan, those are kind of your traditional markets that have been around for decades. And then you've got these emerging markets like Central and South America, and Asia especially. Africa's a little bit of a way off, that those things that you're able to do there as well. But you have to be realistic about how much money there is to be made in the short to medium term in the more traditional markets versus the emerging markets. So that's kind of my summary of what international marketing means.
Sure. No,
does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Yeah. And then we wanted to spend some time talking about how we do it, how we've done it, how you might do it. And in that sense, I think you wanted to really highlight the importance of a strategy.
Yeah. Oh, well, okay. So here's the big thing for me is that obviously you can go globally with your distributor, and in most cases you actually get, when you get distribution deals, and I'm assuming that you're not using TuneCore, but let's say you're using a distributor. I think what the first thing that would be important before you actually give away your worldwide rights is to find out what your distributor has to offer in various territories, because in all fairness, even if you're not going to spend any money there, that is an easy entry point to actually get your foot on the ground, is to find out, okay, do you have an office here? If not there, how are you marketing my record, or how are you going to be selling in my record in those territories? I think that's an incredibly important question to find out, or is what your network is about. And then that really is the entry point, is that if you don't know anything about Japan, or if you don't know anything about Sweden, the person that you should and talk to would be your distributor, who can point you in the right direction. All said and done, of course, the conversation we had was about whether you do give away your rights for worldwide rights to someone, or do you license them? Right. And I think it's a question of resources to some extent. Most labels, at least indie labels, are very sort of short-staffed. So I think the big question here is that you've got to weigh in whether you're getting a decent offer, perhaps in a certain territory. You could do with the cash that you're going to get out of a license deal, and maybe you take that cash and reinvest it in other territories. That's one option. Or you just, as I said, ride with the distributor if they have a good network. And most distributors now are actually investing a lot of money in trying to build offices in various territories, because even they see the actual importance of having people on the ground in those territories. So so that would be step one for me before you start doing anything with the record.
Yeah, actually, that's a really, really important point. And then when you get your record, or even, if you're confident in a few tracks that you have and it's unfinished, I think then, skipping ahead from the talking points from strategy to communication, say you've got your distributor there, then you need to find out who the contacts are, right? Sure,
absolutely. So you have to again. So once you've got your distributor in place, of course, the easiest way to go ahead and do it is obviously you've got DSPs in pretty much all territories. I mean, the one leveler, as I said before, was the internet, but also specifically it was YouTube, which obviously they may not be paying the best rates, but all said and done, they have the most amount of access. And I that all these developing markets, or emerging markets as we call them, as well as a whole generation of kids have just grown up not paying for music, and they still continue to consume music on YouTube. So YouTube is actually insanely important when it comes to international. So if you have a distributor in those territories and they have an in with YouTube, that can always help you. Which goes to this other point I had, which was playlisting. Because, again, there are very few geographical playlists, and there are global playlists, but each territory has its own slots, and it's kind of bizarre, but you could get in to a global playlist from, I don't know, Berlin, from Germany, perhaps, or somewhere else.
Yeah, and I hear a lot, about small label operations cultivating their contacts of the editors in like Southeast Asia or in Central South America, and getting playlist ads there to then drive streams, and then being able to take that back into major markets and demonstrate, that there's a following.
Yeah, and in terms of capital investment as well, I mean, when it comes down to it, this is really an exercise of manpower or time, really, because it's, as I said, like, you've got your record across, you've got a distributor on the other side, hopefully, that you're talking to and you're engaging with. They can give you the lay of the land as far as the market goes. And then you've got to decide, all right, I don't have, obviously, an infinite amount of resources and money. When do I go and hire a publicist? Obviously, the distributor can guide you again on that, because, they know the lay of the land in those markets. When do I hire a radio person? When should I spend digital marketing money on it?
So just going back to finding out no, it's great. It's just going back to finding out who your international contacts are when you were setting up the DESA record. So we're in a different situation now, as much as we've worked together, because I'm working across an entire label of repertoire, and I've got specific partners in each market that I'm putting a fairly sizable volume through. And so we're in regular contact with those people. In some places, we have our own third-party hires on the ground. In some places, we have our own staff. So that's like one way of doing it when you get to being a certain size as a label. When you're working with DESA and Doomtree, that's a much smaller label. Did you face any hurdles trying to get in touch with the local contacts that you were working with?
Well, no. So that was actually the interesting part, is obviously I'd never worked with that distributor before. As the fun part has always been is of doing this, what I'm doing now is that I actually get to work with different distributors and see how they work and who's strong in what territory. And I think that to me has always been kind of an interesting challenge to a large extent. But no, I mean, again, when it came to her record, it was more a situation of trying to find out, okay, where are their offices, who's there. I had the fortune, I actually went across to London when she played in London. Now, Dessa is obviously a touring artist that plays internationally often. She toured pretty much the world on this record already. So I could sort of parlay that and go and meet the distributor. And they've been nothing but helpful, for sure. But that's the whole point, is like, sometimes I had my own connections because of you in Europe. And
back when we used to work together.
Right. And of course, with Run the Jewels or Shadow or whoever else that I've worked over the years. But it was always interesting for me to suddenly come across a whole new crop of people that maybe the distributor recommended or someone else recommended. But I think for me that actually, even as far as, like, of course, it's fun to work in the music business. And what's been exciting also is that you come across new people and you're getting to know new markets. She got some incredibly great press in Germany, which press and sessions that I don't think I've ever gotten with even Run the Jewels, for that matter, because Run the Jewels never went to Germany.
Well, exactly.
But that being said, I just, it was really eye-opening for me to see a bunch of stuff that we got.
I think that's a really crucial point. I think it's really important when we're thinking about international planning for any artist in any campaign, that we think about whether the artist might go there, or what we can do specifically for that market. Like, these are all very, very different countries with complete, different cultural variations. And I think we had a situation with Run the Jewels where, for various reasons, they just never made it to Germany. And so Germany is like one of the most well-established record markets in the world, and it made it very difficult for us to ever take the artist past that level. Whereas Dessa has been there, and it's been times. And I think when you're working with international people at distributors, or third-party press agents or whatever it is, they want to know that you need to give them the tools. Like they can only do as good a job with the tools that you give them. And so for that reason, I think it's really, really, really important to have a very joined up, holistic conversation with your artist manager, the live agent, if they already have one, the publisher, the artists themselves, and just talk about, have they seen any fans on the internet from other countries? Do they think there's any demand abroad? Do they have any plans to go there? And at a really basic level, or if it's a more established artist, where have they been before? Like, what has the response been like? And I think that's just really, really important to remember. I think we have a question.
Yeah, I saw that. Do we finish what we? But I mean, okay, should we finish what we're saying?
Oh yeah, sure.
And then go on to that, because that's we'll definitely answer that question. I think for me the big question always is that again, we're indie labels. We are generally incredibly understaffed in most situations.
Yeah, always.
And also we don't have a lot of money, right? And you only have X amount of money, you don't know what to do with it and whether you should spend it elsewhere or not. And I think yesterday, for instance, when we were prepping for this, we had an interesting discussion as to, all right, well, you only have this much money and your primary market is the US. Do you take all that money and spend it in the US, or do I take a piece of it and put it away for Europe just in case? And I think that to me is actually the sensible approach, is that you keep a little bit aside just in case. Once the record's out, you see, especially for a new artist, developing artist. I'm not talking about established artists. I mean, look, we've obviously had immense success with Run the Jewels and Shadow and Cigarettes After Sex. You're having, a lot of success with Des. Has also been to Europe, I don't know, on like five different occasions. So it's not like we're talking about someone we just signed who we found on the subway or whatever. It's like, I'm talking about those artists, and you have one of those who, a local New Jersey band that hasn't really toured the US in itself. When do you decide that Europe is, or even for that matter, Asia, Southeast Asia, if you're a metal band, like Southeast Asia, South America, those markets kick ass for you. So when should you go there, and when should you spend money there? And I think the internet, again, is the answer. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think from our perspective, and I don't think, we're a label of a certain size, and there's certain acts like Cigarettes or Idols that we know that it's worth putting money behind. We know that it's worth finding a way to fund certain activities. Right. But we're still signing unknown artists in a development sense that we can't afford to spend too much money on.
Absolutely.
And I think that you can do a lot with very little. I think you said the answer is digital there. It's so easy to release music digitally now.
Yeah.
And you can go direct to services in some cases. You can go through an aggregator. You can go through a distributor that's got label services. Sure. There's so many different options. And so assuming that you've sorted your distribution methods, however that may be, and I think that, again, what you were saying, you have to rely on the internet, because the internet doesn't care about borders. It doesn't care about countries. Yeah. There are fans everywhere. And I think, to take something that we've always talked about when we were working on with Run the Jewels, and I think that all of the best artists need to do now, is just focus on the fans. Like, how are you going to reach your fans? Yeah. Social media, great assets.
Absolutely.
The product itself, like the music, actually just has to be really important, and that's like across the board. It's not genre specific.
No, of course, that's a given.
Exactly.
Hopefully, you're not putting out shitty records.
Exactly. But I think it's really like taking a thoughtful approach, like of using the data that's out there, that's available on these internet platforms, be it Facebook or Instagram or YouTube or Spotify or now Apple, because you can get, if you haven't already, you can ask your artist managers to get you in on the Apple beta dashboard. So Apple's now sharing data as well that's geographically targeted. It allows you to be able to geographically target. And I think that for us, we really start from that point, and we make sure that we are reaching out to local contacts and the like of Spotify and Apple. We make sure that if we do have contacts for people at the BBC in the UK, people at French radio stations,
Sure.
you can hit them up direct. Like
Yeah.
you really, really can. It's old school, but it works.
Of course.
For the specialist shows. And we just try to triangulate what we're seeing on the data with, you know, if, for example, there's a little pocket of a fan base in Paris and it's like a jazzy, soulful release, then definitely get it to Radio Nova.
Right.
And then maybe I think where you might want to go is, do you want to talk about spending? Like, is that?
Well, no, it's,
that
yeah, well,
do?
that's just it, right? I mean, look, again, you know, we can sit here and talk about Radio Nova or even like doing whatever, any show like the Pocket Plus, whatever.
Sword.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Oh, Blogotech. Yeah, but again,
but I'm just
do
saying,
you need
like,
a promoter for that?
No, you don't. But the point is that you know, we know this because you sort of ran a bunch of campaigns in Europe, and I know this because I was there when all that went down. It's more a situation of trying to know what's out there, and I think scaling it back to a very basic level. It's just that, you know, what you were saying is look at your data, see where it's reacting, keep a bit of money in reserve just in case you want to go out there and spend some money on digital advertising.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps there's a way that you can actually communicate with your fans off the band. I mean, I think that to us at least has been the biggest sort of win is that whenever we worked with an artist, it's even when I was on the label side of things, when I ran the label, or even now outside of it, it's like, all right, you only get revenue obviously from master income or whatever you want to call it. But at the end of the day, your ultimate win is if your artist succeeds. So if your approach is not like, oh, this is my record and that's all I care about, but it's actually about my artist, and you buy into the artist and what the artist is about. You'll see artists actually going around and reaching out to their own fans. I mean, I think Dessa does that quite often. Run the Jewels used to do that a lot. Just leaning on your fans, finding out about things. You never know who might be a fan and where they work, and I think you can get far.
Exactly, and I think as well, going back to just quickly before we start taking questions, I think going back to what you were talking about, like getting to know your international people at your distribution partner, listen to them, learn from them, ask them loads of questions. Like they will like that, because that's them helping to educate you on their market. And actually, it's great if you go there. Like if you're going to France on holiday, swing through Paris and meet your people for sure. But you can pick up the phone, you can email them. It's really straightforward.
I do want to add to that, which is that actually I did go across, and when I did meet the distributors for the first time way back when I was at Mass Appeal, I remember generally the response was overwhelmingly positive, and they were super happy that we gave a shit. And I think that to me is the biggest thing, is that, oh my God, you actually care. You're not like one of those American releases 100%. That only care about the US. So definitely, I think if you reach out, they'll be happy as well. One last sort of thing before is that the other huge benefit of going and building some kind of a brand for yourself internationally is that you'll be surprised as to see how it could be another A&R source for you. So in other words, what I'm trying to get at is that, you slowly build your brand there. You could license it you could license a record or two initially, and then maybe you can start, once you get some traction, you could start going direct with a distributor there. And it's a process. It's not going to happen overnight. And then tomorrow, your brand might actually have a name in a certain market because of the success you've had in the past. That an upcoming band there that otherwise would sign with a local label might look at you and say, well, these guys have their foot in the US, I'd rather sign with them. I mean,
we just did that.
Zena just got one of the hottest UK bands with, you want to tell them the Idols?
Idols. We just put a new track out today, Samaritans. Go check it out.
That's very hip hop of you. So I mean, I think that's a fantastic example where it's a band from Bristol. Partisan is traditionally a US record label, but instead of signing with the UK label, they actually sign with what is the US label. Now, of course, it helps that Zena's English. I'm not going to go there, but still.
But it's a good point. And I think
it's fantastic.
if you have a bigger label and you're trying to think more long term, then I think it is worth saying, how much would it cost me to take a trip to Europe and get the Eurostar from London to Paris to Brussels to Amsterdam to Berlin to Cologne and actually meet these people in a 5-day period? Like, what would that spend be, and how much is there to gain from that in the long term? Because face-to-face time is crucial.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. Should we take some questions?
Yes. Sorry.
So first one, you mentioned the first step is to identify a distributor. My question is, how do you identify distributors?
Right. Okay. I mean, do you want me? Okay. So yeah, sure. Okay. All right. Whatever. For me, okay. Obviously, since I'm speaking for myself, I think you obviously should reach out to pretty much everyone. That's my approach always. Is that let me talk to everyone out there. Let me find out who actually gives a shit about my music. Who doesn't just look at you because you have one artist, because that's always where you get stuck, is that, oh, okay, you have this one big artist and that's all I care about. I don't really care about your smaller releases. To me, if someone is buying into what you're doing, that's the number one win. The second one is obviously network. I think for me, again, network is massive. If they are using lots of sub-distributors, then then the amount of money you're going to get in those territories is going to reduce because someone else is getting a cut and then you're getting a cut. So I would obviously ask about network. That's, to me, is a second important thing. And of course, in terms of manpower, that is also insanely important, because at the end of the day, we have some distributors that use sales forces of other record labels or other larger major distributors, and they don't really have maybe as large a sales team, even though they have reach. I would say that, you've got to figure out whether your records will be a priority eventually for them. Because it's like, all right, I can sell to X, but the major label distributor has all the major product coming in. Will they care about it? So I think that's another pretty important question.
It is. I would add one more thing to that.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, going back to the fact that there are so many options out there, relationships are so important.
Yeah.
And if there's a smaller distribution partner that you just gel really well with, then the reality is they're probably going to work really hard for you. And so I think that relationships are a huge factor, because on the whole, especially when it comes to like the big international digital partners rather, they generally do the same thing. They generally charge the same amount. You can cut deals depending on your leverage, but I think relationships is a big factor. Yeah,
as it is in the music business, I think relationships is definitely huge. And I think the other one that you could consider, depending on how your trajectory is that you should look at the ability to scale as well. So in other words, yes, absolutely. You should see if they've had historic success with any massive band. So they have the ability to handle records that have a long shelf life. So in other words, after 9 months, you still have life in your record, and suddenly you've sold 200,000 copies. So I would look at history of what records people have put out. And then one last one is sorry, I guess this is something which I end up doing a lot, which is trying to find the right distributor, is the ability to sell direct. Like, again, it goes back to the middleman. When it comes to the US, I know this is international, but even otherwise, whether they sell direct to stores, whether they're talking to stores or whether they're talking to one-stops, it makes a massive difference again. So that goes back to manpower, but sorry,
and then the other question that we have is, what's the recommended lead time needed to book international PR, promo, and radio?
Please take
it. I'll take it. I mean, the reality, so I'll just read it out. Oh, everyone can see it.
Cool.
So I think the reality of this is that you only really get one shot to release a record. I think that it doesn't work anymore to go back and promote territories later, a few months after the record's already come out. Like, that is a really good golden rule. And so you need as much time as possible to communicate with, first of all, your local distribution partner, second of all, to find a PR, third of all, to have that PR, that radio person start their conversations. If you think about it as a chain of communication, and if an artist were to come to you today and ask you to put out their record tomorrow, you just wouldn't be able to do it. Like, you have to spend time educating yourself on the music, on the story, on all of those things. So the sooner you can have, the more time, the better, basically. And the other thing that you have to factor in, and you get to know this more and more as you do more international, is that different markets actually have different expectations when it comes to lead time across things like print and across like things like in Germany, they're still working a lot with physical CDs.
Yeah.
In France, there's a lot of summer holidays that the press are just away.
Yeah, July 15 to August 15, do not put a record out.
Or even August till the last week of August.
The last week of August, yeah. Do not put a record out.
If you care about mainland Europe, exactly, do not put a record out between the middle of July and the end of August. It just, there's nobody in the stores to actually take orders.
Yeah, yeah. And the lead time thing, I mean, very specifically also for what it's worth. You know, the US, we can still get away with a month. And of course, if you're Kanye West, you can do it in 2 hours. But but that being said, the UK, especially for me, was the one which is kind of rigid in the sense of saying they have long lead press and they still have actual print magazines that matter and they care, and papers that as opposed to the US, which has become very sort of internet based. They also have publicists that do, or traditionally used to only do what they call offline and online, but now a lot of them have combined. But I'm just saying, like, there's
so many variations.
There is variations, and the UK for me was the one where I personally also, you know, have come across where I'm working with a record and it's coming out in a month and a half, and they're like, or 2 months, and they're like, I'm sorry, don't have the time.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, you can do it. Like, if you really only have a month, you can get it out there. You just have to limit your expectations and your demands of people. And I think that it's always, if you think in terms of, we still, honestly, we try not to be formulaic in the way that we construct our campaigns, but we do still often end up with around about a 3 month lead time between announcement to release. And if you think you can't actually just deliver your stuff into your distributor the week that you're going to announce, expect them to translate a press release, expect them to be able to communicate with everyone, expect them to be able to set up the record for retail, ready for announcement, it's just not possible. You need to give them plenty of time.
Especially if you're not an established artist. Let's
exactly.
be very clear about that. If you are obviously like a star in a certain place, then everyone bends their backs for you. So
100%.
It's a different situation altogether. The one thing I will say though about this in terms of timing is that, you know, as Zena said, you ideally want people to be in on this record from the beginning. But that being said, I would never ever have a different release date across any territory, especially now. Just keep it globally the same release date. There might be a situation where you don't have a physical release in a territory, but there may be a need for it a few months later. Or you may feel like you need a publicist when the band goes back or goes to the market and you didn't have it at release date. It makes it a lot harder. It makes it a lot harder for everyone to sort of campaign around. But I think one thing that they do in Europe, which I always find very interesting, is that they reissue records with additional content, and that's one way of refreshing records at retail. Am I right?
Yeah.
So that's when you could potentially try and get press and hopefully there's a tour around it. What I'm saying is that you've got to do these things. The only way you can hire someone outside of a traditional album date is when there's a lot of activity happening in that market. So that's
and even then you have to expect that your publicist, exactly the same as in the US, you have to expect that, you know, your publicist is going to take a while to, first of all, get their head around what the story is, and second of all, like, getting press isn't a case of sending out a press release and people opening an email and putting a link up. Getting real substantial press is building relationships and nurturing people and journalists caring about artists, and that just takes time.
Well, that's the huge thing, educating them, right?
Exactly. We've got another question which Cheryl and Lisa, are we fine to answer? We good to carry on? Okay. The strong dollar is quite an obstacle. The typical price of a relatively unknown act in the US or that of a niche market such as blues or jazz is above what most promoters are able to guarantee. Any suggestions? That's
a live question?
Is that
I think,
with regards to touring and live? Ross?
In terms of, are you saying that the offers are not strong enough for a band to go abroad internationally? I'm assuming that's the case, no?
If we're talking about the live market, touring is a piece of this puzzle, so it is a relevant question.
Yeah.
Oh, Russ, because of the local exchange rate, sure. Is your question referring to live, to touring, to bands touring abroad?
Like the guarantees. Basically, what you're saying is, correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're saying is that the offers that you're getting from some of these European markets, especially in something like blues or jazz, are not good enough to sustain or to take your band to those countries. Yes?
Yeah. Let's assume that's
okay.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, all right.
Okay. So tricky one. I think that is when, if you're also the label, the rights holder, then that's when you might want to look at a local license of the record, because maybe that might come with tour support.
Yeah, that's absolutely huge.
And it might also come with relationships locally, that say you're working with a local record label that has a good reputation with this type of music. They might also have a great partnership with a local promoter, and they might be able to work together to help you to navigate that. I definitely think that this is a big challenge. And, I think we're certainly not here trying to say international marketing is easy. And I do think that most people will tell you that if they've had success in this area, it's because they've invested in it.
Yes.
And so one example that Amit and I have specifically in this sort of jazz blues market, Russ, is our work with Daptone. And I think, Sharon Jones and Charles Bradley are their kind of more flagship stars there, but you have a number of other acts on that roster which are very niche and always have been. And I think, Sugarman 3 toured their asses off in Europe before Daptone had any brand name whatsoever.
Sure.
And they definitely got paid less at first, but only by going can you actually develop the relationships with the promoters who keep bringing you back. So it's definitely a risk.
Yeah,
but you might lose money on the first tour.
There's just one clarification, which is that if one of the main USPs of your act is that you're incredibly good live, then there's no better marketing than that, is that having you go into that market and tear it apart. So if you have only a finite amount of resources, as mentioned before, then keep some money aside for tour support and definitely make sure your act goes there, because you're not going to get the benefit immediately, but you will get that benefit if you're going to be in for the long haul in days or years to come. I mean, most artists I know, including Run the Jewels or even Dessa for that matter, have gone into those markets, have taken an L in terms of money, but at the end of the day, they've come out on top to a large extent. So I think it's a question of how you can fund it, and there are creative ways of trying to do it. Of course, there are brands, which is something which is obviously very hard to get, but if you can get that, great. If there's obviously local licenses, as she said, local licenses can also you can take the advance that you get for the master and give it to them, and there's another way of doing it there. But I mean, I think you just have to be creative and make sure that you can get your band to play, especially if they're down to go out there and make it happen, and they aren't like sort of they're down to like work hard to get it. Like
definitely,
I think that to me is the big thing. Is like if they obviously are like, well, I won't stay in that hotel. Oh God, I can't share this room. Then that's a different conversation altogether. But if everyone's in for it, then you've got to make sure that you can actually go there and support it in any possible way that you can. I mean, I don't know if that answers the question.
I think it does.
Okay, all right.
Does it answer your question, Ross?
Sort of.
There's no easy answer, that's for sure.
Yeah, but it's totally worth it. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in today, and thanks to Cheryl and Lisa at A2IM.
Thank you both so very much for being here today. It's an excellent presentation, and best of luck to you both, and to you, Zena, on your new release today. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And thanks to all who attended. We'll be back next month with another webinar from the Education Committee. Thank you. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.